got somebody special for you, so we need more applause than that. Are you? Thank you so much for joining us here tonight. We have something very, very special. She is an author, a speaker, a creative spirit, and just happens to be the daughter of the legendary, the one and only Vincent Price. Please join me in welcoming Victoria Price! And Allie. Yeah. And word has it that Allie likes to applaud with you. So I'm not going to discourage that. Oh, she's too cute. I won't be able to focus. Hi, Victoria. How are you?
I am great.
Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here.
So we will get right to it. We all know that your wonderful father, Vincent Price, was known for his voice, amongst many other things. I'm curious, did he read you like spooky bedtime stories ever, or were they like sweet and innocent bedtime stories?
It was actually all about poetry with him, yeah, and Shakespeare. And my dad was an incredible speaker of verse. He loved poetry, and but it wasn't even just like fancy poetry. Like we'd be at the beach, and he would see a bird fly by, and he'd go, "What a wonderful bird is the pelican! His beak can hold more than his belly can." So he loved verse, he loved rhyme, he loved music. So it was more that he did, and I always think of that. And then when I got to about 6th grade, he wanted me to fall in love with poetry, and so he gave me $1 for every Shakespeare soliloquy that I memorized. Now I got 25 cents a week allowance, so $1 for a Shakespeare soliloquy. I fell in love with poetry very quickly.
And how many did you memorize?
I memorized quite a few, and then I had this amazing teacher named Mrs. Jordan in 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, and I was like her star student because I had all this prep time, and we had to memorize sometimes like 20 soliloquies from each play, and by the time I graduated 9th grade, I'd read like 30 Shakespeare plays. So yeah, so I was fortunate in the Shakespeare department.
That's amazing. I love that. I wish I would have done that with my kids. If only I could go back. All right, so do you have like an unexpected or funny dad moment that would surprise those of us who are fans of your fathers?
Well, I don't know if it'll surprise you, but my dad was a big practical joker, right? And but he was also this wonderful dad. And so I was very young. How old are you when you lose your first tooth? Like 5-ish? So we were going to New York, and I knew we were going to be there for quite a while. And but we were going to be in a hotel, and my tooth was loose. And again, I sound like the most mercenary child, but I was very concerned that the tooth fairy was not going to be able to find me and my tooth, and I wouldn't get my nickel that was going under the pillow, right? So as I kept saying, "Dad, are you sure that the tooth fairy is going to find me? You know, in New York, absolutely, the tooth fairy is everywhere. You do not have to worry about it." So, of course, the first night we get to New York, my tooth falls out, right? So I put the tooth under my pillow, and again, I'm like, they must have just wanted to kill me. "Are you sure the tooth fairy's gonna find?" "Yes." So I wake up the next morning, I still remember this, can't remember what I had for lunch yesterday, but I remember this, the sun is streaming through the window, and I pick up my pillow so excited to find my nickel, and what do I find? A disgusting, corroded denture, which my father had been keeping, waiting for me to lose my first tooth so he could put it under my pillow. So yeah, he thought that was hilarious. Hilarious. So not only could the tooth fairy find me, so could my father and his disgusting corroded denture.
So you've said in the past that growing up you weren't a fan of horror, in spite of your father's many films in horror. Has that changed? And if so, is there something that changed it for you?
So I need to explain why I wasn't a fan. Can I tell you that story first? Okay, and then yes, it has changed, albeit not with violence. I can't take in violence, but I actually do like, I feel like horror has sort of gone back to being what it was like when my dad was making it, much more about the story and the character and the suspense. And but it was really coming to these conventions or doing a film festival and having to watch my dad's movies. I'm like, oh God. And then I realized I really loved them. But the reason, so I didn't like scary things. But it happened because I was maybe about 4 or 5, again, same age, I think maybe about 4. And, my parents explained to me that Dad was an actor, but it's sort of abstract when you're 4, like what is an actor? And they would say like the people on the TV, and I'm like, but he's not on the TV, he's here. I mean, it was very baffling. So they took me to see him in a play, which was Peter Pan, a nice children's play, right, in a Los Angeles production. Now, I should tell you that my mother was a costume designer, and my mother was British. She had a stiff, pretty much upper everything. She was like, no public displays of anything, So I'm sitting next to her, and my dad comes out, and he's Captain Hook, right? And he has a hook, and he's a bad man, and he's doing scary things to the nice boys, and Wendy and Peter, and I am like freaked out. And I'm like, Mom, why does Dad have a hook? What happened to his hand? And she's like, and and the whole audience can hear this child. Why is he so mean? He's not supposed to be mean. I mean, I was like going on and on and on. So my mother had to take me backstage during intermission, which you never do, right? So, but I like to tell this story because clearly my mother wasn't really worried about my future trauma and hours spent in therapy, because while my father was comforting me, she took a series, literally blow-by-blow photographs. I have the entire sequence of my dad comforting me, which my mother took in black and white. So there's my mother for you. But it's so hilarious because I start out and I'm, like completely freaked out, and then he's showing me the hook and he's taking it on and off, and then he's sitting me on his lap, and then he's feeding me popcorn, and eventually I'm fine and I could go see the rest of the play. But my mother and my dad looked at each other, they're like, we're never doing that again. So, thus not only was I scared of things, but probably could have gotten over it by the time I was like 8 or 9, but they're like, we're not putting ourselves through that. So I would watch him spoof himself, because he did a lot of TV where he spoofed being the bad guy, and all my friends told me he was the bad guy, but I never saw that. But then I started coming to the conventions, and I realized how much humor there was, and now there's, certain ones, like lately, I don't know why. I don't know if it's the state of the world, but I'm just in this like Dr. Phibes mood all the time. I don't know why. Maybe I wish I could take out my revenge with like send a few people up in a plane with rats.
So you speak to a lot of horror fans, to art lovers, to spiritual seekers. What's the common thread that you find amongst all those different groups of people? Love.
So the thing I didn't get about horror fans was, a lot of things, honestly, because, I was like, why do these people want to scare, themselves? Like, who would want to do that, But what I didn't understand, and what I've come to understand, first of all, when I first started giving these talks, I would get up on stage and I'm like, I have to confess something. I'm not a horror fan, and I'd like wait for the tomatoes to be thrown, Nobody was upset with me. Nobody took it out on me. And then people would come up and they would tell me what my dad meant to them. And the more I got to know horror fans, and I lead these tours all over the world, and now, like there are people who've gone on like 13 of these tours with me, and I realized like we have nothing in common, and like, they are always in the cabinet of curiosities, and I love cemeteries too, so we're in the cemeteries, but the more murder and mayhem and gore, and we have everything in common because they're curious, interesting, wonderful, funny people, and they're some of my closest friends. But I think the thing really that I didn't understand was 2 things. One is that horror is usually a family affair, that most people got into it because somebody in their family loved horror, and then they share it with someone else, in their family. And how perfect is that? Like, I'm here because I love my dad, and you're here because you love my dad. And, you know, and how often do we get to do that, you know? But then the other part was, I would come to these conventions. I remember the first time it happened. It was a huge convention in Toronto, I think it was. And it was sci-fi, anime, horror, and I don't know, comics, I guess. And so you'd be like, you know, there'd be like Superman next to Darth Vader next to Hello Kitty, you know, it was like completely surreal. And I would look around and I'd think, everyone is here and they're so happy to be here and they're with their people. And I thought, who are my people? Like, and then I realized how lucky you guys are, because there's no convention. I rode horses for a long time and I love horses. But, you know, usually at the horse things, the only thing we had in common was horses, you know, like I'd have maybe 2 or 3 friends, but most of the people in the horse world I wouldn't have been able to converse with, you know, outside of horse. We talked about horses a lot, you know, but I've never really found my heart tribe. And I realized, like, in a way, because of that, you guys have become my heart tribe, and you don't judge me. And the other day I was standing up in front of a group and I was talking about this connection of love, and I heard these words come out of my mouth and I realized it was true, that if I were like bleeding out and crawling to, you know, be saved, and up here was a church and over here was a horror convention, wouldn't even be a question. I'd be crawling to the horror convention.
I think that one needs applause. Allie agrees. When you were writing your book, Vincent Price, A Daughter's Biography, I assume that was a very emotional process for you. Is there anything that you learned through the process of researching, or that something that you discovered about your father that surprised even you?
Yeah, there was actually quite a bit, you know, I mean, and of course, so people always come to me and they say, we want to do a Vincent Price biopic, we want to do a Vincent Price documentary. I'm like, good luck, because aside from the skeletons in his movie, there weren't really skeletons in his closet. You know, I mean, he wasn't perfect, but he was actually a pretty great guy, you know? And movies, and they want to hang it on some scandal or something. So when the book came out, they immediately seized on a couple of things I'd included, and they tried to turn it into this big thing. But one of the things was that my dad was, you know, he was 51 when I was born, and you know, he was the most sort of open-minded person. I mean, he was just this big heart, long legs, you know, and but I found these letters from when he was younger, and like a lot of white upper middle class men from the 20s and 30s in America, raised in certain places, he wrote in some of his letters things that were anti-Semitic, and I was shocked, you know, I was shocked. And by the time I came along, I think I was maybe like 5 years old, the Jewish Anti-Defamation League gave him an award, you know, for being like, you know, one of the most sort of outspokenly pro, you know, I mean, doing things for the Jewish community, you know? And so I was like, who was this? And I thought, you know, I've got to include this, because he understood that he had been sort of fed something by his parents, by his peers, and the moment he realized he didn't believe it, he changed his mind. And that's one of the great qualities of being human. We can change our minds. You know, we can grow up thinking one thing and we can realize, nope, you know? And so you know, but that definitely surprised me. I mean, it wasn't something I expected at all. So.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's very relatable.
Oh, totally. And that's why I included it. And then, you know, like, Good Morning Mary, so your father was anti-Semitic? No, actually. Pretty much every white upper middle class boy in America was, you know, anti-Semitic. You know, Roosevelt was turning away boatloads of Jewish refugees. So hello, you know, but he understood. That was idiotic. You know?
So you did mention that people have wanted to do biopics and things like that. Is that something that you would ever be open to being a part of, as long as it didn't try to scandalize him?
Yeah, and you know, people have sort of gone out and pitched them and things like that, and you know, I mean, really, I've had ideas for how to frame it, but it's hard because there isn't really a scandal. There's 2 documentaries that are almost finished. There's one that a German group did, which that's coming out, well, this year. There's another one that an English guy's just finishing up, and then there's one that I'm actually kind of most excited about. I feel badly for the other two, but this guy he's done documentaries where he takes something that's like a famous subject, but he tries to find sort of what's underneath the obvious, right? And so instead of it being like all the movies, you know, he's really looking at kind of why we're all sitting in this room. Like, why is a man who's been dead almost 35 years still so popular and beloved? And what was it about him? And so I've been working with him on that, and I'm actually really excited about that one, because I think it's going to show more than just Vincent in the movies. It's going to kind of explore like who he was underneath. Why, you know, I always say about my dad, like, it's a bizarre thing, right? Like, the most famous Vincent Price movies, he's not doing good things usually. Like, you know, he's usually killing people, you know, lopping off their heads, dumping them in vats of wax, and we're all rooting for him, right? You know, and there's this thing, right? He was a safe place for us to explore our fears, and it's an interesting quality.
And I think that's hard in general, right? So if you had to host a Vincent Price double feature, what two films would you choose?
That's good. Okay. Boy. I mean, you know, 105 movies, 65-year career. But I think what I would probably do, even though they're not necessarily my favorite movies, but I think what I would probably do is do a double feature of Dragonwyck, which was my dad's sort of first starring role in the 1940s. And if you haven't seen it, it's a complete precursor. I would do Dragonwyck and House of Usher, because you would sort of see the through line of who my dad was. And so when my dad kind of came into acting, which was completely on a dare, he was so handsome. He was 6'4", and he had this blonde hair, and he was super handsome. And they wanted him to be a romantic lead, or you know, even like a sort of rom-com kind of, and he hated it. He was like, you know, who wants to play the good guy? He wanted to be a character actor, and he admired Spencer Tracy and Jimmy Cagney and Edward G. Robinson, none of whom were 6'4" and gorgeous, right? So it took him a while to figure out how he could be a character actor, and he did this play on Broadway, 1941, called Angel Street, and it's where the term gaslight was invented. And he played Mr. Manningham, who wants to get rid of his wife, which was a theme in his movies and life. And so he, you know, and he gaslights her, but he could feel the audience hate him, and he loved that. And so then he realized that's how a beautifully spoken, you know, this man who could speak beautifully, who was so handsome, who looked great in a smoking jacket. And so Dragonwyck and House of Usher, I think, would really show people like there's a through line there.
I love both of those. So being that he has been in everything from Edgar Allan Poe films to The Muppet Show, what are your favorite projects of his that he's done?
You know, gosh, that's hard. I mean, I think for me, it's really where I got to see him as a kid, right? Like The Muppet Show. You know, he did the first season of The Muppet Show. They asked all these people to do the first season of The Muppet Show, and a lot of people were like, puppet show on primetime? I don't think so. You know, and my dad was like, yes. So, or the one I was most pissed off about, I was at summer camp. My dad wrote postcards all the time. And he wrote me a postcard, I got it at summer camp, and he said, I just finished filming the Brady Bunch. I'm like, what the fuck? I don't get to meet Peter and Jan? I mean, it was like devastating. So, you know, so I think those are sort of the closest to my heart, you know, the ones where they were things that I got to watch him do on TV. And you know, the TV thing was great, because that's something I got to see a lot. And my single best, so I grew up in LA, I had parents who, you know, my mother, any excuse for an occasion, so I had a lot of amazing birthday parties, but my single best birthday was I got to go by myself with my parents and spend the entire day with Lassie. Oh. I mean, really. I was like the most spoiled child on the planet. The best birthday ever.
Those are the perks. Those are the perks. So you've attended many horror conventions, and you've said that you've experienced just what it's like from the perspective of horror fans. How do you think your father would respond to modern day horror fandom?
I think he'd be blown away. I mean, literally, I drove around for a half hour trying to park. I rushed in. There was, a line of 15 people waiting for me. I didn't sit down till just now. And I kept thinking, he's been gone almost 35 years. And there are people who are telling me, somebody named their son Vincent, how much they love my dad, and there were actual young people, like, is Drew here? Young people who are into my dad. And I think my dad would be so thrilled, because one of his favorite things about horror was, so he was in his 40s when he was cast in House of Wax, right? And a lot of his peers, some of whom were way more famous than he were starting to kind of fade away. And he kept getting more and more popular. And who was making him popular were kids, young people. And he loved that, because he was a child at heart, and he was constantly interested in what young people were interested in. That's why he did, albums with Alice Cooper and, everybody. He wanted to know what young people were into. And same with the sitcoms. And so I think, first of all, he wouldn't believe that, he was mocked by a lot of his peers. You're a Yale-educated, University of London-educated, fine actor. What are you making these schlocky movies for, right? They really mocked him. And it's absurd, because, horror is, of course, a legitimate genre, but the fact that it's now like the genre, he would be blown away by. And then really literally, like, I could imagine him and imagine what you would think, because he was so, he was not a small person. He was 6'4". He had that voice that couldn't belong to anyone else. Imagine if he walked into a convention now. The whole place would just be like, It happened all the time when I was a kid, but now, it would be unbelievable. He would be blown away. And honestly, as a daddy's girl, as somebody who loved her dad, as somebody who knew how important it was to him to stay current, he's been gone 35 years, he's still current, people still love him. People are still finding out about him. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you for joining us and sharing all these wonderful stories about your father. So, that being said, do you think there are any current horror films or directors that you think your father would admire?
Oh, absolutely. Guillermo del Toro, God, he would have loved to work with him. I think, probably every time Chris got cast in one of Tim's movies, he was like, rolling over in he didn't have a grave, but, his ashes are scattered. But I'm sure he was like, Chris, imagine the career he could have had if he had, lasted another, even 5 years. How many more? Because he had a part written for him already in Nightmare Before Christmas. It would have gone on and on and on, So, I think, but I guess to me, probably Guillermo del Toro is the one I think would be a really great fit.
And is there a specific film that you think he would want to be part of?
Now you're gonna prove my ignorance. So I was talking to my best friend this morning, and she told me she went to see Sinners, and I'm like, I can't. She said, but it's so good, it's so incredible. I said, I'm sure it is, but I can't. She's like, yes, you can. I'm like, I can't. I don't know. I just, so I'm ignorant.
That's okay. That's quite all right.
I just can't. It's the violence, you know. I can't.
I understand.
And I love crime. I love British crime. And I just watched Department Q. Have any of you seen Department Q? And it starts with not a spoiler alert, a guy with a knife through his head. So, what am I squeamish about? But it's the jump thing. I can't do it, and then I don't sleep.
So it's the jump scares for you?
Oh, it's the worst. My dad took me to see, so when the whole disaster movie craze, and I grew up in Southern California, he took me to see Earthquake, right? And it was filmed in Sensurround. And we went to Grauman's Chinese Theater, right? And every time the place shook, I was like, grabbing his hand, you know. And that night, my room in his house, it was next to a sort of a sandy, like, kind of cliff. And all night long, the sand, which, I mean, I'm sure it had done that every time I'd slept in there before, but it kept coming down. I didn't sleep one wink that night. And I came down the next morning for breakfast, and Dad's like, how'd you sleep? And I'm like, I couldn't sleep at all. I was so scared. I was so afraid. I mean, I was afraid there was going to be an earthquake. He looked at me, he goes, you were scared of a movie? That's the silliest thing I've ever heard. I looked at him like, that's how you pay for my private school education. Because millions of children are scared by movies. Yes, I was scared. So, yeah, I'm just a wimp.
So what's one piece of advice or lesson that your father gave you that you still carry with you today?
Oh God, so many. So, you know, the only time my dad ever became Vincent Price was if I, as a little kid, we'd be, you know, driving someplace or going someplace or standing in line at a museum, and I'd be like, Dad, I'm bored. And I'd get Vincent Price, the eyebrow would arch, and he would say, bored? How can you be bored? Life is so interesting. Boredom is the 8th deadly sin. If you're always curious, you'll never be bored. Believe me, I learned not to say that I was bored, but he was right. You know, and I'm a nomad. I've been a nomad since 2016, and I drove into a small town in North Carolina, literally 16,000 people, where I knew no one, checked into an Airbnb. Every single gig I had for the rest of the year was canceled, and there I stayed. And I knew no one. Fortunately, I shared a driveway with this really cool woman, so we would stand 6 feet apart and talk, and I'd talk to people on the phone, but literally I like met no one, talked to no one in person for like 9 months. I was never bored, you know, and that was my dad. You know, I was in a new place. I'd never lived in, North Carolina, you know, it's where I happened to be. So I was going to be curious and learn about it. We led tours, we had to cancel those. We put on events online. I learned how to do that. You know, really, truly, if you're always curious, you'll never be bored. And then my dad's other pet peeve was that he believed that in school, we were sent to school to learn how to be good at one thing, as if that's going to interest us, you know, for the rest of our lives, right? And he did this famous, it was a game show called the $64,000 challenge. The first one was the $64,000 question, and then there was the challenge. But the premise was your vocation was one thing and your avocation was another. So he was on it, his vocation was he was Vincent Price the actor, his avocation was he was Vincent Price the art expert. And you know, and that was just one of the things he was interested in. He loved deep sea fishing. He was an incredible cook. He was an incredible gardener. You know, anything he could learn about, he learned about. And the idea that we're supposed to find one thing to do it until we retire, and then what, you know, like then go off and be interesting. He thought that was the most absurd American thing. And in Europe, you know, in other places in the world, that's not how they think. So he always said, if you limit your interests, you limit your life. And that's, you know, he refused to do that. And that's been my experience of horror fans. And I think that's one of the things that, despite the fact that, you know, people are still trying to convert me to go see things that scare me, you know, I find that horror fans are curious, interested people who are polymaths, who are interested in so many things and know about so many things. And you know, I think that's part of the whole genre. If I could get over the, you know, and I'm interested in it, you know, like I actually give talks about fear, and I give a talk one time about fear where I showed movie clips. And it was in this great old movie palace in Harlem in New York, and it was really great. And I showed the Marathon Man clip at the dentist, and like 3 people got up and left. Like they literally, I said, okay, word of warning, this is the marathon. You know, like 3 people got up. Had their, you know, hands over their ears. There was one guy in the front row, and I made it interactive. We were chatting because I like learning about fear and, you know, and why it's so important for us to process our fears. There's one guy in the front row, and he's watching this whole clip, and he has this shit-eating grin on his face the entire time, and I'm like, okay. And I mean, I could barely watch it, and we get to the interactive part, and I said, sir, I have to ask you, you smiled during that entire clip. And he said, I'm a dentist. But then he said, everybody asked about that. Everybody mentions it, literally, like it's been the story of his life ever since that movie came out. Everybody talks about it. But somebody at that event said something so clear to me that I never understood before. They said, you know, one of the reasons they love looking at horror movies to process their fears is because they're things mostly that are sort of a step beyond what could possibly happen in life. So then it makes the real fears of life less horrible. And, you know, I mean, honestly, what we all sort of numb ourselves to, the horrors of the world, you know? I mean, so I understand the purpose of it. I'm just a wimp.
Yeah, there's something about knowing that you're going to be scared, but you're going to be okay.
Right.
So
Right.
that's,
No,
to
it makes-
me, that's the appeal.
It
At
makes
least for me.
total sense. It makes intellectual sense.
Yeah. So is there a film of your father's that you would like to see remade? And if there is, who would you like to see play his character?
Well, that's interesting. You know, I think it would be interesting to do something. I mean, they are. I know somebody's actually remaking House on Haunted Hill, and I asked who they'd cast. They said they hadn't cast it yet. You know, so I'm always interested when there are remakes. But I think it would be interesting to do something like Laura. You know, a film noir, and sort of see how a film noir would. You know, kind of go over on a modern audience, and that movie is so sort of surreal in a way. You know, people falling in love with a painting. You know, I think it would be interesting to do that now. But who would play my dad? It's so different, that character in Laura. I don't know who should play him. I mean, somebody like my best friend. I just spent some time with my best friend in Colorado, so she's on my mind. But she was on this whole riff about Ryan Reynolds, and you know, like, you know, is he really the nice guy or is he not such a nice guy? And so I like Ryan Reynolds playing my dad's part, but going for like the dark side, and like, you know, it could be because he's, you know, he's sort of charming, and you want to think he's okay, but what if he really isn't?
Yeah, I like that one. So you've been obviously carrying on your father's legacy all these years. Now we're 35 years since he's passed, 32 years since his last film, Edward Scissorhands. What's been the most rewarding part of this journey for you, carrying on his legacy?
Well, I mean, first of all, let's be real. Every single one of us in this room has lost someone we love, or multiple people we love, right? And there comes a point where you can't remember. I mean, you know, in the more modern era, we save voicemails, you know, but I don't know I can barely remember what my mom's voice sounded like. But I'll be walking through a room and I'll hear my dad's voice, you know? And sometimes when I'm at a horror film, like a horror film festival, and they're playing a lot of my dad's movies, I'll sometimes be out in the lobby signing books or chatting with people, and someone will come out to get popcorn, and so the door will open and I'll hear my dad's voice, and I always jump, and then, because I think, oh, my dad, oh, right, it's a Vincent Price movie. But I think, you know, there's two things that are the most rewarding. It's that I have someone I love that people want to hear about. So I get asked to come out and talk about someone I love. And we all have someone we love that we want to talk about, you know, that we wish we could talk about. So how fortunate am I that all of you love my dad and are sitting here at 8 o'clock on a Friday evening in 2000, whatever this is, 25, you know, talking about, we're sharing my dad. So that's A. And then B is the thing of, I think, what I said before, of recognizing that you guys have really taught me that, you know, there's many ways to feel like an outsider in life. And, you know, I think because my parents, it was really important to my parents that I not be what they called the Beverly Hills brat, right? And so they were, especially my mother, extremely strict. My two best friends growing up were Nat King Cole's youngest daughters. He was 3 when they died, and they're twins. And their mother, Maria, was as strict as my mother. And my mom and Maria were really close. So the three of, and we were the 3 tallest girls in the class. And they live here in Florida. And so we were so tight because we were like, in the permissive 60s, the kids of the strict moms, you know? And so, you know, why was I talking about my strict mother? What was I? So I was all of a sudden thinking, oh, Casey and Timmy live close by. I should go see them. Then there I go, squirrel.
Talking about your father's legacy.
But you know, so I feel like there's so many people that don't get the opportunity to have this connection with other people, but I was a kid who passed, you know, who looked like I fit in, and people thought I fit in because I was the kid of a movie star, and I learned to just kind of adapt. But when I got to horror communities and horror fans and horror conventions, I realized, like, I don't have my people. I don't have a tribe of people. I can sort of fit in everywhere, but I don't really have people who are like me. And I'm kind of jealous of you guys. And so when I come here and I feel the connection that you all have with each other, it's like I have this complete vicarious thrill. And it makes me really grateful that you guys have accepted me, kind of by proxy, because you know I don't want to watch a movie with you. But, you know, that we all have this thing in common, and I get to feel like part of the embrace of horror conventions. So I think that's been one of the big surprises.
And I think I speak for everyone in this room when I say you are definitely part of our tribe, like 100%. Yes. So, is there a film of your father's that you feel is still underrated and deserves a more modern watch?
Gosh. I'm just trying to think. You know, I mean, kind of going through all of them. Well, okay, I think it's a sort of category of my dad's films. And I don't think it's so much underrated because anybody who watches TCM has seen like His Kind of Woman 652 times. I mean, it's always on. But his comedy, you know, he was a very funny man. He was, I mean, my mother was funny, my stepmother was funny. It was like my whole life was being part of a Noel Coward play. It was like, you know, they were just witty and funny. And he was so good at comedy. And so I think the humor that, sort of my dad as a comedian is something that I think, I wish somebody, like I'm gonna do something in LA at the Hammer with UCLA, and it's my dad's, it's a retrospective of my dad's television career, and so it's a whole night of film clips and chatting about my dad's TV career, which I've never done that before. I'm really looking forward to it. But I would love to see a whole film festival of my dad's comedies, because he was very funny, and I think people love his humor.
Absolutely. We are going to throw it to you guys very shortly. So if any of you have a question, go ahead and come up to the mic right here in the center, and we will get started on your questions. Here we go. First question. Go for it.
Thank you for coming so much. It's great to hear your stories about your father. I'm curious. I think he was an animal lover. So I'm curious, like, any stories you'd have about him and like cats and dogs, or I know he adopted like a cat in London, Albert, I think, and a Siamese, and any of those stories, and I have a quick follow-up if there's time.
Yeah, no, he was an absolute animal lover, and he wrote a book which is still in print, so if you haven't read it, I think it's the sweetest book my dad wrote, called The Book of Joe, and it's sort of his life story through his animals.
The Book of Joe? The
Book of Joe. It's fantastic. It's really a good book. But yeah, at the end of his life, he had two skipper keys, which are sort of Dutch barred dogs or something, which he named Kiki and Willie, like Wilhelmina, you know. And so he, and it was actually, I had Australian Shepherds at the time, so I drove up to I don't know why this popped into my head, but I drove up to my dad's house, and he was standing out front, panicked. And he was a pretty unflappable person. I was like, what's wrong? He said, Kiki and Willie got out the front door and they ran away. And he was like, I don't know what to do. And I said, so I opened the door, and Daisy, my Australian Shepherd, I said, Daisy will find it. And fortunately, he lived on a cul-de-sac. So but there were coyotes up there, and I think he thought they were goners for sure. He said, what's that gonna do? I said, Daisy, go find Kiki and Willie. And he looked at me like, and when he looked at you like you were crazy, you really did feel crazy. So we stood there and I'm like, no. 4 minutes later, she heard them right back into the house. He was like, oh, it was the cutest thing. But yeah, we always had dogs. We had poodles. My mother bred standard poodles. And before my mom, all animals had whatever they had. But my mother sort of was a very principled person. So she decided that all animals for the family Price should begin with P. And when you breed dogs, you have litters. So, you quickly run out of P's. So then we moved into PS, like Psalms in the Bible, or pseudonyms. So then we had, anything with S would go. And then we went to PT, like Ptarmigan. So, anything with P. So my dad decided that Joe had felt left out, so he became Joe. So.
Thank you. And then the follow-up was, you said your father got into acting on a dare. I think it was a play in London he auditioned for on a dare. Had he not acted much before then, or planned to be an actor before that dare, or what was his relationship to theater before that?
So his very first play, he was about 10 years old, and it was Robin Hood at the community school in St. Louis, of which he is now a distinguished alum. Just got the award last year. But he loved it, completely bitten by the acting bug. He played, the leading role in The Adventures of Robin Hood, and then never was cast again. So he kept being a stage manager and trying to get in parts, and he made these really cheesy home movies where they all had pretty much the same plot. He started making them when he would go visit his grandmother in La Jolla, California. And so he would rescue these damsels in distress and pull them out of the water and give them mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. So then he did that as he got older, and he'd rescue them tied on the railroad tracks and still give them mouth-to-mouth resuscitation in case they had, needed it. So, but then he went to Yale, never got cast there. So when he was a senior at Yale, he befriended, George Thurber, James Thurber, the great playwright, essayist, cartoonist, befriended him, and he shared with Thurber that he had this dream of becoming an actor, and Thurber was like, "Are you kidding? You couldn't even get cast at Yale. What are you thinking?" So that's when he went to study art history, and then he kept talking about the theater and going to the theater, and finally someone dared him to try out for a play called Chicago, which is the play on which the musical was based. So.
Thank you so much. That's a wonderful
Sure.
story.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Next.
Hello, I just want to say thank you first and foremost. It's awesome to have you here talking about your father.
Absolutely.
And just to let you know, me and my wife, we have a 1-year-old pug. His name is Vincent. You can only imagine why. But my question actually is, what was your father's favorite breed?
Of dog?
Yes, a dog. Sorry, I should have.
What other breeds there were? Well, first of all, so we had a pug. And my dad was on, and I think there are clips available, so of my dad on Betty White's show, The Pet Set. And I was thinking about this the other day, because Betty White did this show called The Pet Set. And honestly, we were all way more excited that my dad and our pug was on the Pet Set than if he'd won an Oscar. It was like, Puffy's on the Pet Set. I think his favorite dog, bar none, was Joe. So I would then probably have to say his favorite breed was a mutt. But we had a pug, and we loved that pug. So, and I have some pretty cute pictures of me and my dad with that pug. So I think a pug named Vincent is a pretty darn good choice.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Next.
So of your dad's art collection, was there a piece that was meaningful or impactful for you growing up above and beyond the others?
That's a great question. So I loved animals always as a kid. And my dad wanted me to fall in love with art. So one of the ways that he got me interested in art was he would show me in the house all the art that had animals in it and sort of tell me stories about it. And my parents were divorced when I was 11. And my dad left a handwritten list of the pieces of art that I should get. Of course, my mother had different thoughts about that, but long story short, I still have the list. And in that list, I would say 90% of them are pieces of art with animals. But there was this one, and there's a picture of my dad standing in front of it. He's standing in front of a Diebenkorn abstract expressionist painting, and then below it is this thing. And I don't know really what I thought it was as a kid, but because it was kind of this elongated it was a Northwest Coast Native American piece, and it was kind of big and elongated, and it was spotted. I mean, it's clear to me now that it was probably a toad, but in my mind as a kid, it was blowing a bubble, like bubble gum, and I wasn't allowed to chew gum as a kid, so I was like, I just loved that thing. It was like the bubble gum chewing spotted, you know, fantastical animal. So that was absolutely my favorite as a kid. So thank you. Thank you. Next.
I have a quick comment because you mentioned Del Toro, and the minute you said Del Toro, I said, oh, that's definitely perfect for your father. And of all the things, even though you may have not watched it, his series Cabinet of Curiosities is totally a father's style. It's all short, you know, one-offs that he did, and they're very much about the storyline and that kind of interest, not so much about the gore and the horror. But the question I had for you was...
See, now I'm going to say that and act like I'm knowledgeable next time. Cabinet of Curiosities, yes.
Some of them you could watch. Some of them aren't really, like, terrifying. And it's all about the drive of the story and the interest of it.
Thank you.
But the question I had was, of all the things that he did when you're talking about movie, TV, guest spots, and, like, the voiceover narration stuff, what did he actually like doing the best of those different things that he did?
You know, I think... two things. He loved working with people, and he loved live theater. Probably theater would be number one. But if I had to sort of make a larger arc than that, so he grew up the youngest kid, much younger, in a very musical family. And he sung well enough to be in the Yale Glee Club, and he sung well enough to, you know, be in a Broadway musical or two. But I think because he wasn't as talented of a musician as his siblings were, and then he realized he had that voice. He used his voice like an instrument. And so I think radio was a great medium for him, and animation. You know, so all the animated stuff, you know, because it was a way where you could just, who cares what your face looked like? You were just fully using your voice. So I would say, like, really the overarching would be theater first, for sure. But anything where he got to use his voice, like well, yeah, I mean, I guess in Dr. Phibes it's sort of the opposite. He doesn't have his voice, right? But, you know, there's something similar where you distill everything down and you only have one thing that you can use. In that case, most of the time it was his eyes in Dr. Phibes, right? But really his voice.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Thanks.
Hello, Mrs. Price. Thank
Hi.
you so much for coming out.
Absolutely.
I had two questions. My first question is, when you were a little girl, what was the story that you liked having your father read to you?
You know, I don't actually remember him reading me like a story, you know. I was a big reader early on, and so I just mostly read myself. But it was the verse, you know. He would just look, or he would sing sometimes to me, which was...
Well, there's a good question.
Yeah.
What was your favorite song that you liked to hear him sing?
Well, more accurately, it was his favorite. Anything with opera was his favorite. So he loved opera. And when my stepmother got sick, when I was much older, I always knew she was in the hospital because I'd get a call from him and I could hardly hear him because the opera was blaring so loudly in the background, and she hated opera. So the moment she was in the hospital, he'd blast the engine and say, "As you can tell, Coral's in the hospital." So.
Of course. Okay, now my real second question is, what would you say is your favorite type of art?
My favorite, interesting. His favorite was drawing. I would say when I was younger, my favorite was watercolors, but I would probably say that I have a real weakness for Navajo textiles, and particularly Navajo textiles from, it's called the transitional period, 1890 to 1910. So there's a little specific thing for you, but
That's a good choice. That's a very good choice.
it's a fun question. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Next.
Okay, so I was lucky enough many years ago to find your father's family cookbook at a garage sale, almost in pristine condition. When I get the courage, I'll pull it out very gently, try to pull, make one of the recipes. I want to know what is one of your favorite dishes that he used to make, and if you know it, what was one of his favorite dishes?
He went through phases. So, like at the end of his life, he went to Italy and learned how to make risotto from Marcella Hazan, who was like the Julia Child of Italian cooking. And at the end of his life, it was the only thing that tasted good to him was risotto. So like risotto was a favorite at the end of his life. Slightly before that, he went through this phase. It's in the cookbook. It's from Sardi's, and it's a very simple dish. It's asparagus with a fried egg on top, thinly sliced sharp cheese like Grana Padano or something like that, and cracked pepper, simple things like that. When I was growing up, he was sort of a binge cooker, so he would cook things over and over again till he got it perfect. So I was in college and he decided to perfect the creme brulee, but instead of making little ramekins, he made like vats of creme brulee. First of all, I should tell you that I'm lactose intolerant, and secondly, I should tell you that I don't eat white sugar. However, he did not take no for an answer, and I had to buy new clothes to go back to college. I mean, it was like, because you don't waste food. And he would say, oh, there's no sugar in there. There's no dairy in there. And there'd be like pints of heavy cream and bags of sugar. But in my childhood, the thing he made over and over again that he was trying to perfect was ratatouille. And if I ever see ratatouille again, I might die. But my favorite thing that he made when I was little was souffle. He made this cheese souffle that was unbelievable. I'm literally lactose intolerant and gluten-free, so I can't even tell you the last time I had a souffle, but if that souffle materialized right here in front of me and it was my dad's souffle, I'd eat the whole thing. It was so good. So,
Okay, thank you so
thank
much.
you. Thank you. Next.
Quick comment. Number one, I work for Broward County Libraries in Fort Lauderdale, Deerfield Beach area, and your dad's cookbook is in circulation. So I just want to tell you that. So if you live there, please check it out. Please, we insert numbers. Number two, one of the coolest things that I realized last year, I followed the Rondo Hatton Awards, and I was really thrilled to see that your campaign for Hurricane Helene awareness involved all the monster families, the Cheneys, the Karloffs. Please tell us about that event and how did you end? What was your final total when you raised the money for all that?
Yeah, that was really fun. And by the way, I never really understood awards, but the only 2 awards I've ever gotten in my life that I've been proud of, I was Monster Kid of the Year, Rondo Award, about 9 years ago, and this year. Although, I only found out about it because somebody emailed and told me, I'm now in the Monster Kid Hall of Fame, and it's one of the few awards I'm actually really proud of, so I know. Monster Kid, that's something I actually really feel like I can embrace. I am totally a Monster Kid.
I'm a 12-time Rondo Hatton loser, so I'm glad to be around your glory.
The Hendersonville thing was, so I was in Hurricane Helene in Western North Carolina. I have this little Airbnb, but I just finished up I used to do design, and I had a client who wanted to do a little project there. Anyway, the house was flat and completely destroyed. 5 trees fell on it, everything was destroyed. He was covered by insurance. But so many people were not, because mud and flood is not covered. And like my favorite dog store, they were wiped out by mud. So many people I knew were wiped out. And it was going into October, and I was doing this big tour for Edgar Allan Poe's 175th birthday, and we hadn't had water and electricity and cell service. I came out of there like shell-shocked going into this thing. And I thought, I gotta do something. So I had this idea. The person who lives across the street is like the head of the something in the town. So he put me in touch with someone, and I had this idea. And then I just started mentioning it. I saw John Waters, and I mentioned it to him. He said, I'll donate something. And then Rob Zombie and Cassandra Peterson and everybody, Sarah and Ron and everybody donated. And so the idea was, and then we did a thriller dance contest. And it went to a fund called the Mud and Flood Fund, just for people who weren't covered by insurance. And we ended up raising like $40,000. So, and it was really rewarding to do something for my community. So, especially since they welcomed me. So, thanks for asking. Thank you.
My name is Carlton, and I'm a little bit older than 70, so I'd say when I was growing up, but we didn't quite grow up. So when I was coming along, we were introduced with the Vincent Prices, the Peter Lorres, the Boris Karloffs. Thank you for all that. One of my go-to movies now, I found House of Wax in 3D.
Nice.
And with my big 3D TV, it's great. Growing up like you did, what was Halloween like?
So I think I mentioned my mother was a costume designer. So first of all, like Boris used to say, October was his busy season. So as you can imagine, it was my dad's busy season as well. So he wasn't always around. So what I remember in October, was, my mother and I carving pumpkins, and my mother was even less interested in being scared. So all of the pumpkins were girls. They all had page boy hair and big smiles, like not a scary pumpkin in the lot. They were like ridiculous with bows on their, they were like ridiculously happy pumpkins. But I would say to my mom, I want to be a cowboy. I became like a Bob Fosse clown. Mom, it was just, I was a black cat one year, and literally I looked like I should be on a Broadway show. And all the rest of my friends looked like actual Halloween, costumes, and I was like 5 years ahead of my time. I hated it. So the only fun time was that if my dad was home on Halloween, we had this early RV. It was called the Clark Cortez. It was kind of like a beige milk truck. And it was like we'd go out in it. So I was only allowed one candy a week. And by candy, I don't mean like Butterfingers. I mean like a peppermint. So, I said strict, right? But Halloween was Halloween. So I would start planning like months in advance. Where is the best candy? And in my mind, so there were two things. The rich people clearly had the best candy. That meant Beverly Hills. But you didn't want to go up into the hills. It would take too long. You'd have to hike. So you want to go to the flats of Beverly Hills where you could haul out and get hundreds of pieces of candy, all of which I was going to eat. And I scoped out which houses I thought had the best candy based on the richness of the houses. I mean, I was into this. So I had the whole thing planned, and my dad would take us trick-or-treating, me and my girlfriends, and my mother would stay in the thing making us little snacks that we could have in the little RV that we parked on this top. And I was like, we're moving to the next street so we can get in as many streets as possible. So I'd be getting the candy, and we'd all be comparing notes. And my dad would hide behind the bushes and then jump out and scare people, which was great. Imagine if Vincent Price jumped out of the bushes and scared you in your eyes. So it was pretty awesome. But for me, it was all about the candy.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. All right, we have time for one more question.
Wow, lucky me, right? So again, I guess thank you for coming out.
Absolutely.
The question would be, coming up, I was introduced to Vincent Price through 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo. And then, of course, the voice of the incredible laugh and, Thriller and the whole story and whatnot. So now I have a 14-year-old daughter and a son of 8 years of age. And his introduction was the 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo.
Yes.
I would love to know, what percentage of youth do you find rediscovering your father so far down the line? Because even then, my parents were the ones who introduced me to those things.
Right.
So what's it look like now? What's the landscape?
A lot of it really is parents introducing their kids or a friend but Thriller does a lot of the heavy lifting too, right? and honestly, that's immortality, right?
Yeah.
For as long as there's Halloween, there's going to be Thriller, and even now, if somebody will say, I'll say, I do a lot of public speaking. What about? I'll say, well, I do this, but I also had a famous dad, and they're like, who? And I said, oh, you're too young, you won't have heard of him, Vincent Price. And they'll be like, I said, but you have heard Thriller, right? And then I'll say he did the rap and the laugh at the end. They're like, oh my God, yeah, of course, But I think Tim Burton too. A lot of people because of Edward Scissorhands.
Yeah, Final Roll.
Yeah, but Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo, you know, Scooby-Doo. And that was, he loved doing, again, the animation, he loved that. And I actually have a good friend who played Flim Flam in that.
Yeah.
And so she was able to tell me kind of a little bit about what it was like working, you know, with him. Because of course, you know, all of us as kids, like we didn't go to our parents' workplaces and get to see what it was like, you know, maybe once a year or something, right? And so, you know, it was fun to hear from her perspective how much fun he had. He loved doing that. But I think for me, you know, the thing that's so cool is that there's always some inroad. It's surprising. And now people can do this deep dive. You find one little thing and then you just, you know, look at Wikipedia and then all of a sudden you go on YouTube and then you find this cool stuff and more stuff will keep coming to the surface.
Yeah.
So, but...
I just think it's wonderful mainly because it's like you're saying, there's this string. You find this bit and then as you start to dig, you find so much more work and so much more to get into. And the comedy thing, I actually didn't see the bits that he would do until this year. And my lovely girlfriend, Rebecca.
I met Rebecca, yes. Hi, Rebecca.
She's been slowly introducing me to more and also dragging my daughter even deeper. And so I'm like, yeah, see.
She's a keeper.
Yeah, I know.
Exactly.
I was like, yeah, Vincent, this guy's got the voice, he's got this talent, he's got all this stuff, and there's a lot more to see. So, yeah, thank you for continuing to share this and share your dad with us.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your question. Solid parenting right there. Thank you so much, Victoria. We are out of time, unfortunately, but thank you again for joining us.
Thank you guys for coming out on a Friday. Let's hear it for Abby and Victoria Price. Put your hands together, everyone. Louder, she needs to hear it more. Come on.
Thank you. Yes, good. Thank you again so much. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Go have fun. Go watch the sleepaway camps.
I don't play monsters.
See you all tomorrow.
I love that.